Pull up a chair, man. I gotta tell you the story behind A Whiter Shade of Pale. You know the song. Everyone knows the song. The second you drop the needle on that 45 and hear that heavy, haunting organ, you're instantly transported. But the story of how that track actually came together, and the massive, decades-long fight over who actually wrote it, is wild. So picture this. It's early 1967. The summer of love is just getting going. The Beatles are finishing up Sgt. Pepper, Hendrix is blowing people's minds in London, and everything is all bright, psychedelic colors. And right in the middle of all that, out comes this incredibly heavy, sorrowful-sounding track that feels like it was recorded in a haunted 17th century church. It didn't sound like anything else on the radio. The whole thing actually started at a party. Procol Harum's lyricist, this guy named Keith Reid, is hanging out, having a few drinks, and he overhears some guy talking to a girl. He can't make out the whole conversation, but he catches this one crazy line. The guy says, "You've turned a whiter shade of pale." Keith thought it was just the coolest, most devastating phrase. So he goes home and writes this totally surreal, dizzying poem. It's not your typical "I love you baby" pop song. It's like this hallucinogenic story of a seduction going completely off the rails, mixed with all this weird maritime imagery about shipwrecks and Vestal virgins leaving for the coast. People used to ask him if he was making some deep literary statement because he mentions Chaucer's The Miller's Tale in it. He'd just laugh and say, "Nah, I just liked the way the words sounded together. It just gave the song a really cool gothic vibe." But lyrics are just words on a page until you get the music right. Gary Brooker, the piano player and singer, took Keith's words and laid down the chords. Gary was a massive Ray Charles fan, so he brought this gritty, bluesy R&B vocal to it. But the real magic? That was the organ player, Matthew Fisher. Matthew wanted to cross Gary's soul vibe with classical music, specifically Bach. Now, a lot of people think they just stole a Bach song, but they didn't. Matthew was heavily inspired by a couple of Bach pieces, Sleepers Awake and Air on a G-string, but he wrote that sweeping, majestic organ melody himself. They layered that over this descending bass line that just walks down the scale like a staircase into a basement. The contrast between Gary singing his heart out like a soul singer and Matthew playing this stiff, ornate classical organ line, man, it created sparks. They basically accidentally invented progressive rock right then and there. When they went into the studio, though, the producer wasn't feeling it. The band's drummer was playing a little too heavy, and this song needed to float. So, the producer made a really tough call and brought in a session guy, a jazz drummer named Bill Iden. Since Bill was a jazz guy, he knew how to play behind the beat. He just laid back, tapped the cymbals, and let that Hammond organ breathe. It was the perfect touch. They released it in May '67. Mind you, this was their very first single. Nobody knew who Procol Harum was. It completely exploded. It went straight to #1 in the UK and stayed there for over a month. It sold like 10 million copies. John Lennon actually got his hands on a copy of the single, put it in a custom record player he had installed in his psychedelic Rolls-Royce, and just drove around London blasting it on a continuous loop. He was obsessed with it. But here's where the story gets a little rough. For over 40 years, if you looked at the writing credits on the record, it just said, Brooker Reid. Gary wrote the chords, Keith wrote the words, they got all the royalties. But what about Matthew Fisher? The guy who wrote that iconic organ part that is literally the hook of the song? For decades, he didn't see a dime of the songwriting money. Finally, in 2005, Matthew had enough and sued. He was like, look, if you take my organ part out of the song, it's not the song anymore. It turned into this massive, bitter fight between old bandmates. It dragged through the UK court system for years. It went all the way up to the House of Lords, their equivalent of the Supreme Court, and in 2009, the Lords finally ruled in his favor. They said his organ part was so essential to the DNA of the track that he deserved a co-writing credit and a cut of the royalties. Justice for the Hammond B3, right? So next time you catch a spark, grab a beer and spin some records, put this one on. Listen to those jazz drums just barely keeping time, and Gary's bluesy vocals. But really listen to that organ. It's not just a cool riff. It's a piece of history that a guy had to fight 40 years to own. Keep it groovy, all you beautiful music freaks. Keep those records spinning, and I'll catch you on the B-side.